This new Chicago Bears offensive coaching staff has the all-important job of developing the number one overall pick. And so far, the early returns are that Caleb Williams and his new coaches are all progressing at the right pace.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On the show today, we catch up on this Bears offensive coaching staff, how they're doing with a bunch of new faces coming together with some old faces as well, all under the direction of Shane Waldron. We'll hear Matt Eberflus talk about the chemistry that they're building between some of the old guard and the new guard here. We'll hear Shane Waldron talk about kind of building a unified message when it comes to developing Caleb Williams and making sure that he's hearing the same thing from all the different coaching staff members that he's interacting with. And then we'll also hear about how Caleb Williams has been picking it up well and how the head start he got before the draft with the team has allowed them to stay farther ahead in the regular OTAs and mandatory minicamp process. But I think it's easy to kind of get lost in how many different new coaching staff members, came in here. And it was kind of a whirlwind of, obviously the offensive coordinator searches and then filling out that staff kind of happened quickly here. And we talked at the beginning of this offseason about how critical of a decision this was going to be, whether they were going to keep Fields or draft Williams. They needed to have the right offensive coaching staff in place for them. We've been generally pretty satisfied with the group Shane Waldron has put together. There's a good variety of backgrounds and experiences that go into that, but then it's about kind of making everybody all fit together and get on the same page. Because when Matt Eberflus fired Luke Getsy, he didn't fire Luke Getsy's entire coaching staff. They kept, most importantly, I think, their offensive line coach, Chris Morgan, and also promoted him to offensive running game coordinator. And they also kept tight ends coach Jim Dre, but seemed to have turned over pretty much every other position on the offensive line. But Dre and Morgan have been here since 2022. They're now just as long as Matt Eberflus on that offensive coaching staff. So all of a sudden, you fill in everyone else around him with guys that Shane Waldron picked, plus these two guys that the last guy picked that I guess we're all just going to have to work with and get to know, right? That essentially Matt Eberflus endorses as, no, we want to keep these two and have them stay, as opposed to the previous quarterbacks coach, running backs coach, wide receivers coach, etc. Like, those guys are all brand new, trying to deal with guys who have been here before, but none of them have worked with Caleb before, and now the new coaches don't know the same offense as well as Shane Waldron does. So there's just a lot of moving parts there, and a big part of Matt Eberflus's job has been getting everybody on the same page and unifying the messaging from the coaching staff in this regard. So here's how he sees the chemistry coming together with some of the new guys getting in.
I know you've talked since the beginning of the offseason about how happy you were with the offensive staff you've assembled. How have you seen different coaches kind of slide into the right lanes in terms of, who's dealing with what, particularly, as it applies to Caleb, and, you've got this extra pass game coordinator now, quarterbacks coach, offensive coordinator, you've got the guy back from Italy, as we established last week. How would they all fit in, and is there a learning curve there?
Yeah, there's definitely a learning curve, right? Because you have new people coming together. So that relationship piece is always big, the chemistry of that, and then learning how to communicate effectively and efficiently together to get to the right answer, not necessarily your answer. So you got to make sure you're doing that well. And in offense, you really have a few guys that are like the guys that you got offensive coordinator with Shane. He's done a fabulous job of leading that group. And then you have an offensive line coach that's high in the run game and the protections and all that. But and the addition of Thomas has been great. too, because now he gets to help tie that all together with Shane. So that's been really good. And I feel great about the new additions in terms of the position coaches. I mean, Chris Beatty is unbelievable. Chad Morton's is really remarkable. Jennifer's done a wonderful job. So it's been good to see, and the chemistry's strong, and those guys are coming in. The new guys are coming in year 3, and they understand how we do things. I had a bunch of meetings with the coaches to start the off season to kind of outline the standards and making sure they understand what and how we do things here. And they bought into that, and it's been great.
Just like the players have to build chemistry with each other when they come to a new team, so does the offensive coaching staff, right? That's a part of this process. And it helps that a handful of these guys were with Shane Waldron on the Seattle Seahawks, but not all of them, right? I mean, you've got wide receivers coach Chris Beatty comes over from the Los Angeles Chargers, wasn't necessarily a part of this organization. Jim Dre and Chris Morgan were here with the Bears last season, and then Thomas Brown came over from the Panthers. So it's not like you have this total faction of like half Seahawks offensive coaching staff, half Bears offensive coaching staff, but there is some wider connections to Waldron that we'll talk about in a minute here. But it just reminds me back to when the Bears first hired Luke Getsy back in 2022 and built that initial Bears offensive coaching staff. That I remember when they put that staff together, one of the things we noted on this podcast was that it was a bunch of position coaches that had also not really worked together all that much. That because Luke Getsy's coaching experience was relatively limited to the Green Bay Packers in the NFL, albeit under a couple of different Packers regimes, but he hadn't been in multiple organizations and had a lot of exposure to a lot of different coaches. So they hired the offensive line coach Chris Morgan, and it's not like Getsy had ever coached with him before or worked with him in any professional capacity, or the tight ends coach Jim Dre for that matter. Like everyone across the board, it was like, okay, I think they pulled a couple of coaches from within the Matt LaFleur tree, but not much. It was pretty much a offensive coordinator with new QB coach, new receiver coach, new running backs coach, new O-line coach. And it was like, all right, we've got all these different minds from all these different backgrounds, which might give you a nice variety of opinions and perspectives that can be valuable, but also more room for disagreement, more room for miscommunication, for not being on the same page. It requires more communication and more clarity and leadership and direction to then get everyone aligned properly with an offensive staff. And that's part of what's tasked for Shane Waldron here. He's got some familiarity with some of these guys, but not all of these guys, and really kind of get that established while also then, establishing that for a rookie quarterback has really been what is the monumental task for them this offseason, because you don't want to have different things coming from different people or have coaches not be on the same page, because then players won't be on the same page. It's like, well, this coach told me that. Oh, well, the other coach told the other guy this. And then all of a sudden you have confusion that's created by the coaching staff that just is added on top of whatever confusion might happen for players naturally throughout this process. So it's been a point of emphasis for Shane Waldron to really kind of get everybody on the same page, especially when it comes to Caleb Williams. And I think the structure of this staff in particular lends itself nicely to that. And we'll kind of go through what that looks like and why Waldron feels confident in how that's coming together next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. Summertime means baseball. The NBA Finals just wrapped up, and the NHL playoffs are right about to. The Stanley Cup Finals are about to wrap up as well, and you can bet them all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from NBA futures, NFL futures for this upcoming season. Who's going to be the Stanley Cup Finals MVP, the Conn Smythe Trophy, I believe it's called. Who's going to hit one out of the park? I mean, you could bet on Caleb Williams' rookie season passing numbers, Rome Odunze's rookie season receiving numbers. Odds for Week 1 Bears against the Titans, also available on FanDuel. All it takes is a $5 bet on anything else, and then if you win, $200 extra in bonus bets. To get those $200, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. This offensive coaching staff, #1 priority is Caleb Williams. Like, yes, you need to develop the offensive line and, the receivers or whatever, and you need to have a well-functioning players at every spot. But the goal here is make sure everything is as good as possible for Caleb Williams so that he becomes the best quarterback he can be, and then everything else takes second place to that in some way, shape, or form. And so it's critical that even with a new coaching staff and, a bunch of coaches coming together that not all of them have worked together before or been in the same organization before, that they are all together in the same page and lined up well. And I think it's important to note that, even though these guys didn't all come from, say, the Carolina Panthers, the Seattle Seahawks, there is enough of a Shane Waldron connection here that kind of holds everything together in my book. So, for example, your quarterbacks coach, Kerry Joseph, came from the Seahawks with Shane Waldron. He's been with the Seahawks since 2020. So, had 3 or 4 years of experience directly working with Shane Waldron. So you have that kind of OC and QB coach chemistry. That's great. Okay, but then, what about a passing game coordinator, Thomas Brown? He was the Carolina Panthers offensive coordinator last season. But before that, he was an assistant head coach and a running backs coach and tight ends coach with the LA Rams, with Shane Waldron. So while Kerry Joseph and Thomas Brown have not directly worked together on coaching staffs, they have both worked with Shane Waldron, albeit in different places. So I think it's easier for those guys that are working directly with Caleb Williams to be on the same page compared to a coach who might come in and have never worked with Waldron or never been around this offense or this system before. And I think the same is true across this coaching staff. You look at the running backs coach, Chad Morton, comes over from the Seattle Seahawks, right? He's been a run game coordinator and running backs coach for them for a handful of seasons. So you've got this building continuity there of sure, it's not like they all worked with Geno Smith together or they all worked with Jared Goff and the Los Angeles Rams together. But the fact that they all come from the same system and have the same have worked under the same philosophies before goes a long way towards getting everybody working in the same direction. Here's how Shane Waldron kind of described building that sort of unified voice from the coaching staff so that everyone is giving Caleb the same information and pushing him in the same direction.
Shane, I'm curious about the structure of your staff. Having a passing game coordinator, run game coordinator, quarterbacks coach, and so on and so forth. Is that something that you're used to from your previous stops of working with?
Yeah, the way we're set up has been pretty similar to the last few stops, whether it was LA or in Seattle, and was able to, when they got on board here to build it under a similar frame as that.
So in your experience, I guess what are the keys to making sure that kind of you're all on the same page, that Caleb knows who to go to if he's got this or that, and that the messaging's not changing?
Yeah, I think that starts with the communication amongst ourselves within the staff, whether it's with Thomas Brown or Kerry Joseph, how we're working there with Robbie Picasso or Ryan Griffin, the different guys that are going to be, around the quarterback, but knowing that there's still, a voice that's coming from me that everyone's going to echo, and they've done such a great job of being in sync, knowing that, who has different elements of the offense, but then also, making sure that, we'll have great discussions during staff meetings, we'll have great discussions as we're watching film. I would hope that not everybody agrees with each other every single second of a meeting, because that would mean everyone's just saying yes to say yes. So we'll have good, tough conversations, with the goal being, what's right for our offense this year. And when we go and break those meetings as a staff and then go join the players, we're all on the one unified front right there and presenting the same message to all of our players.
So it sounds like they're very conscious of making sure they're doing this right and taking the right approach and not, being aware of such a critical factor here of, yes, making sure that Caleb Williams is getting the right messaging here. And I think that familiarity among the coaches gives me a little bit more peace of mind there. To compare it back to Luke Getsy, you might remember, Getsy came in from the Green Bay Packers. They hired quarterbacks coach Andrew Janocko, who had been with the Minnesota Vikings for the previous 5 or 6 or 8 years along the way, but never worked with Getsy, but it was fairly well regarded as a quarterbacks coach. And then their wide receivers coach, Tyke Tolbert, had come over from the Giants. They made him passing game coordinator as well, but again, never worked with Luke Getsy or in directly a Getsy system. So all the different guys working with Fields were all kind of coming from different backgrounds, albeit, they had a chance to sort of unify under one offense, but it takes more time to get together there. I guess, to be fair, the Bears' current wide receivers coach, Chris Beatty, came over from the Chargers and doesn't have that exact Shane Waldron connection that some of the other guys do. But in this case, he's not the passing game coordinator, right? It's the three main guys that are working with Williams: Waldron, Thomas Brown, and Kerry Joseph. All Shane Waldron guys, all have worked in this offense before, worked with Shane Waldron before, and have worked with the quarterbacks to be able to help develop them through this process. So it feels like it's a good coaching infrastructure in place, at least at the spots directly around Caleb Williams. Obviously, the other coaches are going to be a part of this too, and a big part of making the offense be the best offense that it can. And those are all going to be important. I mean, especially that Matt Eberflus really needs to be able to justify keeping offensive line coach Chris Morgan, right, and promoting him to be running game coordinator. Like, we need to keep seeing then that offensive line improving, and that the young guys on the offensive line, Darnell Wright, Braxton Jones, etc., like, need to keep getting better, and the running game needs to keep being a big successful part of this offense. If you're going to say not only, hey, we're happy with him as our offensive line coach, so we're going to keep him around, but also we want to put him in charge of our running game, then I'd like to see those kind of results manifest themselves this season. I don't know exactly, do you measure that in terms of yards per carry? I think it's more of a feeling of like, okay, is this offensive line getting better or staying stagnant? Because at times it's felt a little bit more stagnant the last couple of years. I guess Tevin Jenkins has gotten better over time, but Nate Davis got worse, and Braxton Jones, from year 1 to year 2, I don't think he made a big leap, but he didn't get worse. So I mean, we'll kind of see how year 3 goes there. But I mean, it's that kind of thing, right? You look across this roster and say, okay, is the coaching staff making players better? And clearly they felt like every other member of the offensive staff, except the O-line coach and the tight ends coach, weren't worth keeping around. But these two position coaches in particular, they liked enough to keep around, and in case of the offensive line coach, promote. And hopefully in combination with the kind of consistent messaging they're getting from Caleb Williams, and maybe now trying to build that all together into one complete offense, you can get something that works a little bit better than what it did last year, with perhaps some improvement at wide receiver to make a big difference there, and perhaps at quarterback as well. Over time will prove to be an improvement, even if Caleb has regular rookie season struggles along the way. At least we know so far Caleb is right on track, and really was ahead of schedule from the start, which has allowed them to sort of stay at a good pace and progress throughout this process. So we'll hear from Shane Waldron about how much they've put on Caleb Williams' plate and how he's handled it so far, next on Locked On Bears. Don't forget, if you need more sports coverage, we got you here on the Locked On Podcast Network with our 24/7 live stream on the Locked On Sports Today YouTube channel. Our streaming channel is programmed for you every day to bring you these biggest stories without all of the argument television you get on Fox Sports or ESPN. It's the can't miss analysis, opinions, and news you need, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or our free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I felt like every day we got access to Caleb Williams and the offense during OTAs and mandatory minicamp, we were seeing steady progress in the positive direction. That, of course, there were up days and down days, interceptions occasionally, bad decisions here and there, like things that a rookie quarterback normally goes throughout this process as he gets to learn an offense, gets to know his receivers, and is working through, testing some things out, trying to figure out what he can and can't get away with in the NFL and with these players and with these teammates, and figuring out how long it takes certain receivers to run certain routes and how fast guys are and what the offensive line can do, right? There's a lot of different moving parts there. But throughout this process, the Bears haven't really had to slow down, and they've been able to get a lot on Caleb Williams' shoulders. And one of the things Waldron said, and it's not going to be in the clip that I play here because it's kind of a separate part of the press conference, but that throughout this draft process, remember they were working on giving Caleb some coaching materials and installing ahead of the draft. They gave him, some things to work on before draft day so that when he came into the organization, he would already be a few steps ahead, where a player who hadn't had that would be learning all that stuff at the very beginning. And one of the things that Waldron said was that usually, the team is going through like voluntary workouts during like April and May before the draft and stuff. And then after the draft, when they get everybody together for OTAs, you take all the players that were at the voluntary thing and then add in rookies at OTAs. And usually when you add in the rookies to everyone else who's kind of been around at least a little bit, that he said usually you kind of have to slow down and back up a little bit and say, okay, now we got to catch these guys up a little bit, especially when it's a rookie quarterback. We got to like get him, when he's your number one quarterback, right? You got to get him up to speed to kind of where everybody else is so then we can all move forward. But he said that because of where Caleb was in that working ahead process, they really didn't have to back up when the rookies came in. Like obviously all the other rookies are starting from square one, but like to have the quarterback ready to go and already farther along, like they really didn't have to back up or slow down or kind of rewind or go back over some of the same things again, because Caleb had already gotten a lot of that instruction before he had even been drafted by the Chicago Bears. So that kind of gave him a head start in that sense, right? It's not like he's farther ahead necessarily than where he needs to be right now, or like that he's light years ahead. But the fact that he got that head start has allowed them to kind of maintain a more normal pace for the offseason, as opposed to like having had to slow it down or back things up and then starting from a little bit farther back and maybe not being as far along then now as you would have been otherwise. And so as a result, Waldron said, they've been able to throw pretty much everything at him, and he hasn't had much trouble picking it up at all.
Would you say that you've thrown like the kitchen sink at him as far as everything in the offense, or kind of just more spoon-fed along?
Yeah, no physical kitchen sinks, but there's been a lot of plays. So, we've got, we've put a pretty good amount in, because a part of this in my mind in our minds as an offensive staff is to really, build some volume in the offense, knowing that to see what all of our players can handle. We have a lot of different pieces to that puzzle, so wanting to see what different skill sets are going to be able to handle different parts of our offense, and then with that goal of building that towards training camp and then into the regular season. So he's dealt with a good amount of volume right now, and we'll continue to build on that until we get into a game plan mode.
You said that you guys weren't going to hold anything back from him as far as like learning the offense. Is that typical of a rookie, like someone like Caleb being able to handle that much and not necessarily have, I guess another metaphor would be training wheels?
Sure. I think every one of those situations are so individual based. And so for us being around Caleb, seeing what he's able to handle, seeing what our other players are able to handle, with Austin and Brett and Tyson, the other quarterbacks in the room, I think really, day to day playing off, how they're feeling. Do they feel like we can move on to the next install? And for us during the off-season program, we were able to really kind of continue on the whole way through based on those guys' ability to grasp the information.
So to me, this is all like good news right where you need to be, right? It's not, I don't want to make it like overly hyped off-season update of, wow, see, the Bears are geniuses who are on the fast track developing this quarterback and are light years ahead, et cetera, et cetera. Everything is going to be great. Super Bowl, Super Bowl, Super Bowl. No, but this is like checking the box of like, yes, okay, they're approaching this the way they should from a coaching staff perspective. He's not having any trouble picking it up. They're not having to slow down or anything. So it means that A, like they're teaching it well, and then B, he's like grasping it well. And some like both of those things have to be in place in order for this amount of progress to come across. So like I don't want this to be like over the top hype, but let's just say like, good, checking the boxes, mission accomplished. This thing is moving forward the way it should be. And Caleb is going out of his way to try and keep that momentum going. We've already heard him say that he's planning on getting the offense together, the receivers and stuff, either in California or Florida. They're going to come together and work out during this summer break before training camp. So it's not just 6 weeks of the so-called brain drain before they get back to training camp, but having a little kind of build back workout in there to kind of build that chemistry a little bit more and keep things fresh and make sure that it's still sort of top of mind and fresh for them when they actually come into training camp at the end of July and really get things rolling again that way. So I think everything is on pace and on target and full speed ahead of where it's supposed to be, and we can acknowledge and approve and agree with that and feel good about that without blowing it up to be something more or some sort of bigger signal of what's to come. It's all right. We're right where we need to be, meeting expectations, if not maybe even exceeding expectations, but right on track how this should be coming along for a coaching staff with a bunch of new moving parts and an offense with a bunch of new players in it as well. So that's where we get a nice little offensive coaching staff update at the end of mandatory minicamps as the Bears are now in their summer break. Certainly, if we get more updates on offensive progress here, when we hear about the Caleb workout, or certainly once training camp comes around, you can be sure we'll bring you all the updates right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'll apologize now for not having a Monday podcast yesterday like I normally would. I hate to miss Mondays because I always want to start your week off with Locked On Bears. But to be honest with you, not to make a big deal out of this, I was in the hospital Sunday night, so I was not able to do a podcast from a bed in a hospital, but feeling a lot better right now. Not 100% at all, but powering through. Very, very minor. Just was a lot of pain and a little infection type thing going on, but nothing life-threatening or too serious. Just enough that it was disruptive to everyday life. So powering through. Should be able to do the podcast the rest of the week here. We're slowing down a little bit for this part of the off season as well. So, it's not going to be a full 5 days a week here until we get a little bit closer to training camp. But didn't like to have to skip a Monday without any kind of advance notice. But appreciate you bearing with me here and still tuning in when I am available to get you here with the right medication has done wonders for me here. Not even hopped up on painkillers or anything for this podcast. Coming to you raw and real here on Locked On Bears. So appreciate you making us your first listen whenever you can, and I hope in exchange that even if we miss a day on Monday, that when we come back on Tuesday, you're still ready to bear down.